Good evening, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to all of you. Welcome on Facebook, welcome YouTube, welcome on Twitter, and welcome to our newest channel, Rumble. Thank you for joining us. We are McDuff Lives, and tonight it's my pleasure to welcome back David Cranmer Underdown. And David, it's been about a month since we've had a chance to get together. It's really nice to get back with you. And how are things with you?
I'm doing well. I really enjoyed the last show with, analyzing the picture, and I'm excited to have an opportunity to discuss another interesting picture with you.
Well, folks, if you're not aware, the last time David was on, we did a show on the photograph from the Carnegie Awards of 19.
December 2001 or
Right,
November. It's right after September 11th.
right after September 11th, and it's an amazing photograph with a lot of just so much depth that you can get from it when you dig into the individual personalities in that photo. Uh, anyway, so now tonight we're going to look at another very interesting photo, and let me see if I can get it up on the screen for us. Sorry, this will take me a second. I was trying to find a really high res image of it, but it's actually there's not too many copies of it around that we can see.
No.
So hang on. There it is. All right. I suppose everyone can see that, at least generally so. And there's quite a lot of what I would call old white men in this picture. A lot of them younger than I am now, but nevertheless sporting gray hair. The ones, that we can easily identify as Henry Kissinger, kind of a smirk on his face as he leans back in his comfortable V-neck sweater. And you pointed out that everybody's wearing a sweater in this picture. You think that there was a memo went around? How do you see this coming together?
I think there's absolutely a dress code, and it's almost like a theme party where everyone is supposed to wear kind of a cozy sweater to kind of soften the reality of what this group sadly is a group of very the highest what I think is many of the highest level intelligence and military sort of that corporate public-private partnership that we talk about with the military industrial complex. And these guys are, that I think they're wearing the soft cozy sweaters to not to distract you from the reality.
That they're not exactly soft, cozy, cuddly guys in their real life.
No.
And also, of course, in modern thinking, you see these sweaters and you think of Bill Gates, who's adopted the same type of a strategy of he's just a really soft, kind of almost a metrosexual kind of. Yeah, you don't have to worry about him.
Well, I know you were a lawyer for most of your career, so I worked as a consultant like right out of college. So the idea of wearing a suit versus business casual, that when I was working, I worked at Arthur Andersen right after school in 2000, from 2000 to 2002, and it was there was always like people struggled with business casual attire. Like, they didn't know what to do. And, I feel like some people really struggled with it. And, the, it's just to me, it's very interesting that they do that. I mean, again, the setting for this is that it's supposed to be like a business retreat for the Bohemian Club, which they is a building in downtown San Francisco, and then they have this Bohemian Grove, which is like it's part of the redwood forest. I think it's a couple, maybe a couple hours. I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it's north of San Francisco. And so they have sort of a in town, sort of the town and country thing going for them.
Well, they go out in the country, to relax, right? And no rules.
You
what's
know,
what goes on in Camp Mandalay of Bohemian Grove, and this picture is from 1977, which I,
mhm.
I think is also remarkable when you think about how long ago that is. And yet there's Henry Kissinger, still a force in American and world politics, and uh, you know, of course, Jerry Ford over to the right there is fairly obvious. But why don't you take us on a tour through this image and bring us up to date as to what some of these folks have done? I see the name John McCone down there on the left, and he's
Yep.
somebody that we've talked about many, many times on McDuff Lives, a person whose involvement in post-war and corporate matters has just really cast a big shadow over present times.
Absolutely.
Okay, so over to you.
Okay. Well, John McCone is a great person to start with because, as you said, he's a, I think for the average sort of JFK researcher, he's a incredibly underrated character. He was the man that replaced Alan Dulles after the Bay of Pigs, when Alan Dulles and Richard Bissell and Charles Cabal were fired for their job on the Bay of Pigs. The person that was brought in was John McCone. And from what I was looking at earlier today, he was actually not the first pick. JFK wanted to put in Clark Clifford originally to be the CIA director, which he refused. Then he gave it for a very short time, and I can't remember the name, but he ended up leaving and going to USAID, and then McCone came in as the director of the CIA. His background is tied deeply to a lot of the characters in this photo. He is a California guy. He went to the University of California, Berkeley, in Berkeley, California, which is, if you know the Bay Area of Northern California, is Oakland, Berkeley, and San Francisco are kind of the major parts of the San Francisco area. His family was in the metals business. He They had a iron and steel business, consolidated, which actually merged with the family of the Bechtel family in there. So if you can see, there's the Bechtels. So his steel company merged with Bechtel, and then they did a super project called the Hoover Dam, and a lot of these characters tie back to the Hoover Dam because Bechtel, the Kaiser family, and McCone were all in the same company. Those three families were together, and then there were five other companies which formed what was called the Six Companies. And the six companies did this super project, which was to bring electricity basically to the Southern California to, dam up the Colorado River. And it was a, major infrastructure project. So he was involved with that. He then gets into the, sort of fast forward to the era we're talking about with JFK. He was the one that, and you may know more about this. He had the honeymoon memo. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So the honeymoon memo was he had the so that, and again, I think this is where the Lee Harvey Oswald story kind of comes in, because they were taking the U-2, they were flying the U-2 over Cuba, and they were getting pictures of these Russian nuclear armaments on Cuba, and he was evaluating them. And part of the story is that Oswald, who had been a radar operator for the U-2, had gotten a job as a working for a photography company that was working on the U2's photographs. So McCone was on his honeymoon when there was a I'm trying to think of what the exact incident was, but it was after the Bay of Pigs, and there was another because he had been installed. He was the CIA director, but he was on his honeymoon in Europe, and they had this honeymoon memo. So I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit more. But he was, historically, he was the CIA director for the assassination.
He was the CIA director during the assassination of President Kennedy, and appointed by President Kennedy. Of course, it's a tragedy all the way around. I just went over to his Wikipedia just to clarify, because I did not know about that honeymoon mention. But let me scroll down to it so we get that, and then we'll go on to somebody else. Oh, where'd it go? I thought I had it.
He was also supposedly very much recommended by Bobby Kennedy. So that's always interesting because Bobby Kennedy seemed to have this great rivalry with Roy Cohn. I know you commented on a Roy Cohn picture earlier, but there was this seemingly they were vying for similar positions within the Justice Department, and so it's always interesting that angle.
McCone was a key figure in the executive committee of the National Security Council during the October 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. In the honeymoon telegram of September 20th, 1962, he insisted that the CIA remain imaginative when it came to Soviet weapons policy towards Cuba, as in September 19th, NIE had concluded it unlikely that nuclear missiles would be placed on the island. The telegram was so named because McCone sent it while he was on his honeymoon in Paris, France, accompanied not only by his bride, but by a CIA cipher team. McCone's suspicions of the inaccuracy of this assessment proved to be correct, as it was later found out the Soviet Union had followed up with the installation of medium-range ballistic missiles and IRBMs, intermediate-range ballistic missiles, sparking off the crisis. Okay. The thing about him, the connection of the Bechtel Corporation, having merged with McCone previously, it is a extremely industrial side of the military industrial complex. And as you say, we don't talk about McCone very often, so I'm glad we spent a good time with him tonight. Let's move on.
Okay, so the next character is Stephen Bechtel Sr. So Bechtel was started by his father, and his father had an interesting. He died when he was in 1933 when he was in Moscow, and then Stephen took over the Hoover Dam project. They also, right after the Hoover Dam, which was in 33, they'd started doing oil pipelines for the Standard Oil of California company, which currently is called Chevron. But SoCal, as it was nicknamed, was one of the major players in the Saudi Arabian oil concessions. So again, you have this this intrigue of building the infrastructure projects, the oil pipeline, obviously Standard Oil of California having Rockefeller ties, but then also having these more contemporary interests of the Middle East and the wars in the Middle East regarding oil and transportation of oil. And the Bechtel company so if you read the Eustace Mullins book, he says that Bechtel and Kaiser, the Kaiser company, are front companies or cutouts for the J. Henry Schroeder company of Germany, and that they were financed by Schroeder's. And of course, the Sullivan and Cromwell were the lawyers for Schroeder, and they were directors of Schroeder Bank. And you also have the Rockefeller connection, because Avery Rockefeller is the one that sort of creates the New York franchise, I guess, of the Schroeder Bank in New York, which is again, it's the same kind of oil and the infrastructure. But the thing that I find so interesting about Bechtel is that the story of Mohammed bin Laden starting the Saudi bin Laden construction company is sort of a Horatio Alger story of he was a peasant that caught the eye of the king of Saudi Arabia, and then was given some, very important construction projects in Mecca and whatnot, and then developed into the largest construction company in the Middle East, where we know that Bechtel was building the trans Saudi Arabian pipeline that goes through Saudi Arabia to Lebanon. So again, when you get into these kind of old relationships, and especially with 9/11 and with the bin Laden family, there's a lot of old relationship there that I haven't sussed it out or really found exactly anybody talking about that. But um, my instincts say that they are very much old partners.
The whole bin Laden family traces back to this person that was a Horatio Alger peasant, raised up coincidentally as the Bechtel Corporation gets all of these contracts from Saudi. And well, let's move on. Who's next?
So we've got Henry, who we've talked about quite a bit with his connections to the Rockefeller family. We've talked about, one of the things that is really, really sunk in for me was his role at Camp King with the what was the denazification process of basically using, what we call advanced interrogation techniques of breaking prisoners or getting confessions or information from people. And again, like, I don't know his specific role. He moved to Camp King in 1946. That was the same time that Reinhardt Galen was at Camp King when they created the Galen organization. And he was also the translator of Allen Dulles at the same time. So he's somebody that is, just it's hard to, during my lifetime, he wasn't a public figure. I was, when we were texting earlier in the week, I was saying that I watched the All the President's Men movie for the first time. And I feel like in the 70s, he was just a much more public figure because he was Secretary of State and he was, so involved with Nixon. But during my lifetime, I've been aware of him, but he wasn't like he wasn't operating it really at a public level. So much attention went to, the president or the Congress or, other figures seemed to draw much more attention. But he, it's hard to believe that he's, still in there and, to this very day is still somebody that you have to think about and kind of try to figure out what he's up to.
Yeah, well, he's been up to a lot, and the very short brief you gave us about 1946 should send everybody a huge message. And remember who Reinhard Galen is and was at that time. He was the supervisor of the intelligence service for Hitler's Eastern Front, and that involved quite a lot of nasty, nasty dealing. He knew all about the Holocaust. He knew all about the Einsatzgruppen, and he knew all about how to extract information from people. And putting him in Camp King with Henry Kissinger and the
Gottlieb,
go ahead.
Sidney Gottlieb, and Kurt Blom also there.
Gottlieb was there too.
Sidney Gottlieb was running the program.
And Kurt Bloma was there.
also there.
And he is a bioweapons guy, right?
Head of the cancer program for the Germans.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've spent a good bit of time on three characters so far, but McCone, Bechtel, Kissinger. Wow. I mean, it's just chilling to realize that when we're looking right now at a war in Ukraine. You mentioned the denazification program that was supposedly being run by the Allies in Oberursel in Germany, Camp King. Well, now there's a denazification program being run by Vladimir Putin, in the Donbass, and we seem to be on the other side this time. It's you know, one of many questions I'd like to ask Dr. Henry Kissinger, but I don't think I'll ever get that chance. Very, very creepy person, and I'm sure that he at some point was one of the people involved in what do you do about McDuff? What do you do about Tom O'Loughlin?
Yep.
Okay, let's get some more names out of this picture here.
Okay, so the next picture is Edgar Kaiser Sr. He's the son of Henry Kaiser, who starts the Kaiser Corporation. This one is where it gets very personal with with your father and sort of piecing this together. This character is the same effect for me. Edgar Kaiser was the person that came to Ann Arbor, Michigan when they took over the Willow Run factory. Henry Ford. So if people remember the sequence of events, it was Edsel Ford and Henry Ford worked with a man named Albert Kahn to build the Willow Run factory to build B-24 bombers for Consolidated Aircraft. And this was in Ypsilanti, Michigan, which is the adjacent city to Ann Arbor. It became the largest manufacturing facility in the world. And for people with pop culture references, Rosie the Riveter was a woman that was riveting the B-24 bombers at Willow Run. So after the war effort, they built an assembly line that was 1 mile long. They could build a plane every hour. They could build a B-24. This is one of the key manufacturing facilities for aircraft for World War II. So it was being run by the Department of the Army. I think it was the Secretary of War was running it, but they after World War II, Henry Ford had an option to take it over, which again, if the story of the Fords was that Edsel died during World War II, that he supposedly had so much stress on him from the war effort that he passed away and died sort of young. And Henry, his father, had sort of come back to take over Ford Motor. And there was, he was sort of an old man at that point, and there was kind of a power struggle with a man named Harry Bennett, who was running security for the Ford Motor Company. And then they brought in a guy named John Bugis, who I've posted a lot about, who kind of came in and he was hired by Edsel, but he was sort of Edsel's guy, and Edsel's widow wanted Bugis to get Henry Ford to retire and to get Harry Bennett out of Ford Motor Corporation. And this is when Henry Ford II, who's fighting in World War II, comes back and takes over the Ford Motor Company. And so at that point, he's a young, inexperienced businessman. So this is where the story of the Whiz Kids comes in. So they have a guy named Tex Thornton, who's at Harvard, that has these, I think it was roughly 10 people that he'd been sort of cultivating, and they were using statistical analysis and, for war manufacturing. And I think they were starting to use computers for, doing evaluation of military tactics and things like that. And so they bring in this Whiz Kids group. And of course, the kind of the marquee name of that is, of course, Robert McNamara, who, played, when we talk about John McCone as the CIA director, Robert McNamara is brought in as the Secretary of Defense. So that's the lineage of all these characters and how they tie together. So, so Edgar, Edgar Kaiser Sr., he is the, so after Willow Run is not, the lease is not picked up by Ford Motor, it becomes part of a new car company called the Kaiser Fraser Automotive Company. And so this is basically the Henry Kaiser Company of California, getting into the car business, taking over this facility, and he puts his son Edgar Kaiser Sr. to take it over. And he's the man that buys 100 Underdown Road in Barton Hills, directly across the street from 101 Underdown Road, where my great grandfather lived. And he, of course, was recruited by Alex Dow, who was the president of Detroit Edison Company. Dow was the man that introduced Henry Ford, who was working in a substation in Detroit for Detroit Edison. He took him with him to a Consolidated Edison meeting where he first was introduced to Thomas Edison. So this Alex Dow, who again is a very interesting Horatio Alger story, supposedly has no formal education to take over the Detroit Edison Company. He recruits my great grandfather from Cornell to come to Ann Arbor, and he works for a company called the Huron Farms. He subdivides the land along the Huron River, and they build power stations along the Huron River, which of course provides the electricity to Willow Run, which is just, I think 5 miles away or whatnot. And that's my great grandpa that he is an agricultural school from Cornell. So of course, like, I'm always like, that was the same program that, believe it or not, that Edward Bernays was a Cornell agricultural school alumni. He was 8 years after him. But again, when you get into these programs and these schools and stuff, it's just very uncomfortable for me, because he of course dies in 1930. He dies in a car accident, and my great grandma, she wants to sue Henry Ford personally for it, but she doesn't, and then she's the one that ends up burning to death later. Yeah, my grandpa is 14 when his dad dies. He ingests a peanut, is the story. He's sent to the Trudeau Sanitarium at Lake Saranac, where he lives for 2 years in an iron lung. And that's right next to the Knollwood camp on Lake Saranac, where Guggenheim's, Lewis Marshall, the Seligmans, like the Mayer Eugene Mayer's sister is married to the Blumenthal. They all are right next to him. So that's, again, like, very sad for me, because again, it was like the Underdown Road was, there's only 14 houses on that street. And again, like, I don't, it's just hard, because it feels like such trolling. But again, it was like, 12 years later. But the thing that really sticks out to me is the Detroit Aircraft Corporation, which was owned Lockheed Martin. They made the blimps. They had a partnership with the with the Zeppelin company in Germany. This is in the late 20s. The principals of that company are Henry Ford, Edsel Ford, Charles Kettering, who becomes the chief engineer of General Motors and DuPont, and then a man named William Bushnell Stout, who is the started off as an engineer for the Scripps Booth Automotive Company. He invents the tri-motor for Ford, the aircraft engine. He then starts Stout Aircraft, that then is later consolidates into Consolidated Aircraft, and then he then becomes the chief engineer of Consolidated Aviation, which does, of course, builds the B-24s for Willow Run. And then, of course, the fifth person that's a principal of that is Alex Dow of Detroit Edison, who is supposedly the best friend of my great grandpa, and his wife Vivian is best friends with my great grandma Helen Douglas, who's also from Trumansburg, New York, right next to Ithaca, and her last name is Douglas, which, of course, as we remember, Douglas Aircraft was the aviation company that originally starts the Rand Corporation with Hap Arnold, and then after 1 year, the contract is given up by Douglas, and of course, the Ford Foundation takes it over and moves it to Santa Monica, California. So these things are all, it's like I was telling you before, I went up to like the basketball game with my mom to go up to Ann Arbor to watch a game, and it's just it's just interesting. Like I was like walking my dog on what's called the Diag, which is like the kind of central part of campus, and the elm trees planted on the Diag were planted by Andrew Dixon White, who was the Skull and Bones roommate of Daniel Coit Gilman,
Oh
who
boy.
has very direct ties. Both those men have very direct ties to this picture, because Gilman became the president of Cal Berkeley, and Andrew Dixon White, who was a professor at the University of Michigan before he goes to become the first president of Cornell, the same Cornell, he was initially recruited by Leland Stanford to be the first president of Stanford. He does not accept it. He wants to stay at Cornell. And instead, he recommends his friend, David Starr Jordan from Indiana University, who is the youngest president of any university at IU. And then he leaves IU and he goes to Stanford, and he brings with him many of the professors from the original Stanford group are from Indiana University. And of course, David Starr Jordan is one of the founders of what we're looking at right here, the Bohemian Club. He was one of the original stakeholders of Bohemian Club. So it's a pretty I don't know what to say on it. Like, because I have these stories. Like, my great grandfather he was a supposedly a really into an arborist, and really into would do lectures for the like Michigan State, is the agricultural college, and he was very into to trees and being an arborist and whatnot. But of course, my suspicion is that he was also working on like ethanol, the corn fuel. Of course, if you're doing ethanol, because if you know the old history of like Henry Ford, and the idea of the fuel that was going to be kind of the super fuel of the future. Petroleum wasn't the original. I mean, petroleum won, but ethanol was sort of an idea that a lot of people had, that you could sort of create your own ethanol. And I know there's some theory that the prohibition was sort of created to throw a whammy on people that were distilling spirits, and it wasn't just necessarily about Henry Ford not wanting drunk workers at the River Rouge plant, but there was also some we want to keep our grip on the resources.
When you share, David, your intimate connections and the tragedies in your family, of course, it's gracious of you to do that, and it also is very helpful to just to point out the fact that while very few of us can put together the details that you have, and of course you're so intimately right there in the neighborhood with these amazing characters. Um, but everyone's life is touched by these people. Everyone's family has got somebody that was either killed in a war that they started, or by a disease that they failed to control, or by some other environmental disaster that wiped out their family. The the actions of the people in this picture have affected you deeply, and they've affected me deeply, and they've not. But it's not just you and me; it's everybody in this country and everybody in the world. That's why it's so important that we share this information. And so let's use the rest of the time we have to go through a few more names here. Oh, I did have a question. You
Yeah.
mentioned a number of people, such as Seligman and other names that uh, are Jewish, and I'm thinking, is there any Jews in this picture?
Well, again, like I don't know. I think Kissinger is, but I don't know. I feel like that with
Well, that's right, Kissinger is, yeah. But
within
is he really, you know?
I don't know. I don't know. It's if like when you're talking about a group like the Bohemian Club and the Bohemian Grove, these are the people that are I think they get into the intelligence and the cryptology and all these things because they like the esoteric. They like knowing about Francis Bacon and what's the different Walsingham and all of these spy masters, like, and using encryption and coding things and all that. Like, to me, this is the group that really they recruit the real minds that are attracted to this kind of just the not like when I mean, people talk about like Freemason things or Rosicrucians or the Knights Templars and all this stuff. Like, to me, this is the group that really is into it. That, like, again, like, from personal connections and like knowing different families and stuff. Not every person in the family is like that. Like, some people just want to drive a fast car and go to the club and date all the models and stuff. And then maybe another person in the family is like really into like this kind of interest. So it's a I think it's very much selected. I mean, I feel like I've said ad nauseum, like, I feel like I was right there to be, tapped to be in some of this stuff, and I wasn't. And it's just like it's hard for me to believe it. But again, like, like, just going back to that same Edgar Kaiser and the Kaiser family. Another really key thing with them is that they had the Kaiser Permanente, which was uh, the first healthcare system, the first HMO. They got really involved in that, and they also brought in Timothy Leary to be the head of psychology for their Kaiser Foundation, and so and I know that Leary is probably more famous for being at Harvard or at the Hitchcock Estate in Westchester and whatnot. But um, these guys tie to all of these things, and like we kind of opened talking about Gottlieb and the idea of getting information, or the idea of brainwashing somebody or controlling somebody's mind, doing these techniques. And sadly, this, to me, this is the group that is into that stuff. That's why the cozy sweaters is so like an animal, like that, that's a predator animal that's got like a bright colors or whatnot. I don't know. It's a very
I
disturbing.
think it I think it's called a wolf in sheep's clothing.
Well, that fits right into the idea of the Fabian Society. That was their mascot.
Yeah, and that's what they're doing. They are intentionally destroying the present world so that they can make it over in their own image. Just like some people think, God made humans in his image. Some people think, God made this world, and uh, we shouldn't mess with it so much. But there are these, I don't know, nerds is a good word for them, but they're so incredibly powerful because of their family and elite connections and just their willingness to do Machiavellian deeds and then smile about it later. What does they say? The thing that it's on the brick wall there about spiders. You know, it's a metaphor for don't 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 let creeping spiders get into your mind, and it means when you have your conscience starts to bother you, tell it to go away. Don't worry about it. You know, we're the people that know what's going on. We do things because we're the right people to do them. We have to do them because we have to advance mankind into the next, and you know, get closer to the real potential of humanity, and you know, weed out the useless eaters, as Henry Kissinger himself would say. Um, let's see. George Schultz is there. You want to speak a little bit about George?
Sure, we can talk about George. He, of course, as people that follow your show know that he's somebody that is, deeply tied to your father. He was a classmate at the Loomis School with him, and then he goes on to Princeton and becomes a University of Chicago MBA. That's his kind of his background as far as his schooling, and then he is somebody that becomes a I think he's one of the only people that was like the Treasury Secretary, the Secretary of State. I think he's had maybe 3 cabinet positions, but he was also again somebody that really ties into this Bechtel, Kaiser, McCone. He was one of the he and Caspar Weinberger were kind of the 2 guys from the Reagan era that had these deep Bechtel connections. So the thing that I have really kind of locked in on with George Schultz is his connections to really to contemporary events, and the number one thing I would say was his co-founding with Henry Kissinger the Nuclear Threat Initiative. He was one of the founders of that organization, which is kind of has a partnership with the DTRA as far as handling and advising on nuclear, biological, and chemical materials. Ted Turner was the kind of the celebrity frontman that donated to it, and then you had William Perry, who was the Secretary of Defense, and then Sam Nunn, of course, who was one of the sponsors of the Nunn-Lugar Act, which was the basically the what became the megatons to megawatts deal, which was the breaking apart the Soviet Union's arsenal of nuclear, chemical, and biological material, and their human capital that handled that, and then sort of redistributing those characters. He's right in there for that. So one of the things that really sticks out to me is that the Thermanos company, which was the blood company, where again they used a Horatio Alger story of a cute, Stanford girl that drops out after 2 years, and she just wants to. She's afraid of needles, and she wants to come up with a new way of administering medicine through patches and whatnot, and she just happens to get the backing of George P. Schultz, comes in and identifies her as a, super genius girl that is, like a lot of our Horatio Alger kind of tech world heroes. That story is that their skills in a fast moving technical world are just too advanced, that they're just being held back by being in a traditional university setting, and that they're just blazing new ground, and they just need to, be free to innovate. And so that's, the story. And of course, the directors that they bring in are the same people from the Nuclear Threat Initiative. Henry Kissinger is a director. Sam Nunn is a director. William Perry, the James Mattis, who was the Secretary of Defense, was on there. David Bose, who is the famous Boyce Schiller Flexner lawyer that seems to be involved in every lawsuit, including the hiring Hunter Biden to go to Burisma. He was in the for people that are fans of the Phoenix program. He's was the lawyer that represented General Westmoreland in his lawsuit against CBS. He was the lawyer for the Bush and versus Gore, the famous hanging Chad in 2000. He's just everywhere, and he accepted a role as a director to be the chief counsel of Thermano. So and so George Schultz is right there for that. And then of course, with what Mark Kulak is working on a lot is talking about Gilead and their product remdesivir. And so remdesivir or Gilead Sciences brought on three, very high profile government people to become their directors. And of course, George Schultz was one, Donald Rumsfeld was another. And then the other one was, again, a character that does not get a lot of mention, but I feel like needs to have lots of light shine on him. And his name is Bino Schmidt. And Bino Schmidt was one of the first venture capitalists with Jock Whitney. And he was he was appointed by Richard Nixon as the head of what became the War on Cancer. So when we had the breaking away of the offensive biological and chemical weapons programs, it seems to just sync right in with the creation of this special cancer virus program and the war on cancer. And Bino Schmidt was one of the directors of that. And then he, of course, was right there on the for Gilead as well. And of course, his son was a Yale president. So there's just a lot of I don't know that it's so George Schultz is just somebody that again, like I'm just like when I feel like I share my own personal stuff, I try to be very empathetic for you and your family and your dad, because I know he's somebody that was his classmate, and at a small private school where at a school like that there's very much a camaraderie and a brotherhood of going to a school like that. And to be betrayed by seemingly betrayed by someone like that is pretty I don't know. I struggle with it because, again, like, they, on my mom's side of the family, the one of the co-founders of Skull and Bones was her relative. And for them to just be sort of, I mean, not to say that I, want to be a Skull and Bones and whatnot, but Skull and Bones and Brown Brothers Harriman had a huge impact on, when we talk about, the impacting of hundreds of millions of lives or billions of people's lives. They did. And for them to be carved out of it, again, like, this is why, like, I am struggle with pictures like this, because I feel like there are a lot of people that rag on Freemasons, which probably rightfully so. They deserve a lot of attention and a lot of criticism. But when people say that the basis of these organizations is to help your brother over any existing law or religion or family or whatever, that you'll do anything to support your brothers, my experience is I don't see that. When I analyze your family story, I don't see that. I see betrayal from these groups that are supposedly so into these fraternal organizations that just don't seem to measure up to what their reputation is, as far as, they may be smart and, have access and influence and power, but to me, they don't, I don't give them a lot of respect, honestly.
Edmund Littlefield is named in the image, as well as Gerald Ford. So perhaps we should talk about Edmund if you have any comments on him.
No, actually, he's a character that I don't. Do you know anything about Edmund?
Nope, not a thing.
So the guy next to him, Frederick, he was the director of the Dillon Reed Corporation, which again is another just layered important company. Of course, Douglas Dillon was the Treasury Secretary for JFK. Like guys like the Draper family, William Draper Jr. came up in Dillon Reed. Characters like James Forrestal, Dillon Reed. Like there's a lot of deep history with that. And then of course on a Detroit level, when the Dodge brothers, who were initial investors with Ford, they died. They died in of the Spanish flu in 1918. Both brothers died, and then their widows took over the Dodge Automotive Corporation, and the company that came in and bought it from the widows was, of course, Dillon Reed. And Dillon Reed was also the company that put together the deal for Page Motors, which was Harry Jewett, who I've talked quite a bit about. He was bought out by the Graham brothers with Dillon Reed financing. So there's, just a lot of interest there. And then as far as Gerald Ford, he's interesting to me because he's obviously was the star of the Michigan football team, and he was a Grand Rapids guy and University of Michigan, and just like to be honest, like a great hero for the state of Michigan. But his he's also the guy that was supposedly getting blackmailed by J. Edgar Hoover as a proxy for Meyer Lansky's network during the Warren Commission. If you hate J. Edgar Hoover and you think he was the top dog that was calling all the shots and doing all the blackmailing, then it was Hoover. But if you believe the story that the Meyer Lansky's organization and the if they had the goods on Hoover and they were acting through him, or maybe they were partners the whole time, I don't know. But Ford, of course, as everyone remembers, was the president that came in after Nixon resigned, and he had a very important vice president, Nelson Rockefeller. So all these guys have really old ties to different important events, and of course with Ford being from Grand Rapids and sort of having that that Dutch background that we talk about. I mean, the company that Eric Prince is from Holland, which is right next to Grand Rapids, and Blackwater is another organization that is a really important organization to study. And if you think Kofor Black is the kind of the puppet master of the whole Burisma and things like that, like I tend to believe that he has an old history with CIA and with Blackwater.
Yeah, well, in addition to the suspects on your list there, J. Edgar and Lansky, I would just go back to Skull and Bones and the Freemasons, as well as Jerry Ford was a Shriner Freemason. Those are some of the ones that really do have some power, along with Hoover, who was also a Shriner Freemason. So they keep their secrets. If they don't, then bad things happen. Um, and we think about newsmen who have tried to pierce that veil and suddenly get cancer and disappear. Things like that definitely happen, and they keep their secrets. But on the other hand, they also are willing to stab each other in the back, because in as much as that brotherly love thing appeals to young men that don't know where they're going in life, or maybe just want a mentor or somebody to help them understand, how do I get from what I learned in school to actually being a man, being somebody that's really part of the society. And they draw people in on this wings of hope, and yeah, I'm going to lift myself and my family up through this fraternal organization. And then, but you get to a point, if you rise up high enough, where the things that they want you to do or you have to do are not what you envisioned when you joined the organization. And in fact, you might find yourself being forced into doing things that you don't really ever want to do. Um, and that, I'm afraid, is the story of today, where we have people that are in positions of leadership but are really puppets, being blackmailed or otherwise just mind controlled. And starting with Camp King, the art of mind control has advanced quite far. Um, I am happy that you and I somehow did not get that tap on the shoulder to rise up into the world of secret societies and skull and bones, because that is a horrible burden to bear, and I'd so much prefer not being part of some situation where I might be drafted to do something that really revolts my conscience. So thank you, David. Thank you very much for a very interesting and thorough rundown of the principal characters in the Bohemian Grove photo from Camp Mandalay 1977. Um, Terrific. Thank you very much, David.
You're welcome.
All right. And thanks everyone in the chat room. Thanks everyone who is watching this on Rumble, our new channel, as well as BitChute and Odyssey for our archives. We continue to expand here at McDuff Lives, and we do appreciate your support. I'll see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. for a chat. So whatever's on your mind, please bring it with you and join us in the chat room. Good night.